In the days following the killing of Jordan Neely on a New York City subway, which we talked about in our last episode, protesters have disrupted train service in the subway. And, I gotta give it to these guys. I mean, it takes some balls to jump on a subway track, which is what they did. So here they are.
What's his name? What's his name? Say his name. What's his name? Say his name. Say his name. Say his name. What's his name? Say his name. Justice for. Justice for. Justice for.
So there you have that.
Yeah.
Now, go ahead. Do you want to introduce this Fang piece?
Okay. So first of all, that tweet had almost universally negative feedback. And I think the response that most resonated for me that I saw was these people would have stepped over Neely on the way to work the day before this happened. And that is absolutely fucking true. That is absolutely true.
Of course.
It's not,
that's true of
it's
everybody
not,
in New York. Yep.
It's not like you have this great outpouring of care for these people. You don't. This case is being just used, propped up as a political talking point. There's absolutely no nuance to it. And really to demonstrate the hypocrisy of a lot of the people now who are calling out about this. A lot of these were the same exact people, as we started to talk about last week, who fought against Adams trying to take more mentally ill people off the street with involuntary commitment. They fought very strongly against that. Now, if that policy had gone into place, Neely certainly would have been a candidate for that kind of placement. So Lee Fang brought the receipts last week. We were just talking about it a little bit, but he really demonstrated it. Here, scroll down some.
But first of all, the system failed Jordan Neely. Russell joked to me that he must have seen our video because that's almost to the word exactly what we titled our segment on that when we put that in.
Exactly. His stepfather murdered his mother, and after that, he became increasingly erratic. He was diagnosed with a schizophrenic break. But when they tried to start to, hospitalize people like Neely, who clearly needed help, they all came out against it. A lot of the people who are crying about Neely now were not there for him before. New York City Council member Chi Ase denounced Neely's death as the murder of a mentally ill black man who was killed by a bloodthirsty vigilante. By the way, one of the people involved was actually black himself, one of the three men. Tiffany Caban, another member of the council, she almost won attorney general out in Queens, tweeted, it was one of those like Bernie movement lost causes. Another member of the council tweeted approvingly of a thread that mused that one of the men who restrained Neely was motivated by racialized bias and nationalistic bigotry. Vocal New York, a left-wing criminal justice reform group, claimed in a statement that Neely had been lynched and that the incident showed that a white man can kill a black man and be released without charge. The New York Civil Liberties Union similarly claimed Neely's death was the result of the stigmatization of people of color. Yet just months ago, the NYCLU, Vocal New York, Ase, and Caban were leading the charge against a proposed expansion of government services designed to prevent the type of incident that occurred this week. They protested New York City Mayor Eric Adams's plans to deploy emergency responders and police to, if necessary, involuntarily commit severely mentally ill people who pose a threat to themselves or to the public. Under Adams's plan, the teams of mental health case workers, healthcare professionals, EMTs, and cops would first try to persuade these individuals to voluntarily admit themselves to medical facilities. As a last resort, though, these teams would have the power to coerce mental treatment for people on the streets or in the subways exhibiting extremely erratic or psychotic behavior. When Adams unveiled the plan last November, he immediately faced legal challenges and protests from left-wing politicians and organizations. Asay scorned the measure as simply a ploy for police to just arrest homeless people and throw them into hospitals and jails. Now scroll down some. Before his death, Neely had a warrant for his arrest for allegedly punching a 67-year-old woman as she exited at a subway station in the East Village in 2021. The victim of his assault was reportedly knocked to the ground and suffered a broken nose and orbital bone, according to the New York Daily News. Neely had been arrested over 40 other times, including for punching Philemon Castillo Baltazar, a 64-year-old man, in the face at a Greenwich Village subway station, and for kidnapping a 7-year-old girl. Baltazar, who was attacked by Neely at the Greenwich Village subway station, told reporters this week that the man clearly needed mental health services. He should have been in some rehab center, said Baltazar. Okay, so for anyone who says, well, why do you think his behavior represented a legitimate threat? Well, as Keaton pointed out in the last episode, and I don't know if your view on this has evolved at all. Yeah, people start screaming and yelling on the subway all the time because of everything that's being discussed in that article. Why should a man who literally punched a 67-year-old woman in the face, not out of malice, but because of mental health issues, why was he on that subway? Why was he there? He tried to kidnap a 7-year-old girl out of mental health issues. Why was he even on the street? So I think it is reasonable. We can't know, we weren't there. But I can tell you as a New Yorker, if 3 people felt threatened enough to intervene like that, his behavior was probably convincingly threatening enough for it not to simply be ignored, as it would be 99% of the time when somebody is screaming crazy stuff on a subway car. Given the history, I think it's, and given the 3 people, not one, made that decision, I think it's reasonable to believe that, which does not excuse choking this man for 15 minutes.
Well, that was always my argument. I mean, I never said that, they should have just turned a blind eye to whatever he was doing and gone on scrolling their phones. I said, it's quite possible that some intervention was necessary. Like I said, when I've ridden the subway in New York, most of the time people leave the guy alone when he's on a tear. Right. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes somebody gets in someone's face, somebody doesn't take that shit, and there's a skirmish, there's a struggle, there's something goes down.
It sounds to me like it was more than that, though. It sounds to me like these people have legitimate reason to fear for their safety.
But what I'm saying is, but people have legitimate reasons to fear for their safety. In a lot of these cases, you can argue that constitutes a legitimate threat, and that's why I said some people fight back. Some people take measures.
My question as a New Yorker is, what did he do that made 3 people make that decision? No, but what I'm saying is, I'm
trying to give you yes for an answer here. What I'm saying is, that I understand that there are situations where people feel it necessary to fight back, but there's a lot of room. There's a whole lot of room between doing nothing and choking a guy to death for 15 minutes.
Sure.
So if you want to say you want to fight back, well, that's why I told you. I'm trying to give you yes for an answer. You want to fight back, fight back. But there's a way to fight back without a Marine who ought to know when you're endangering a life and when you're not. There's a whole lot of room between not doing anything and choking him to death, and their actions were extreme.
Yes. I don't understand why I didn't put him in an arm lock or something like that, because chokeholds can be very unpredictable in their results.
And once you got a guy in that hold for that long, he's done anyway. He's out. At that point, you can say, listen, are we cool now? You're going to fucking chill now? Can I let you go? And then see where that, you know what I mean? Like, there's
apparently there was somebody on the video apparently saying, yo, you better loosen up. You're going to kill the guy. So,
right, exactly.
Man, there was a discussion. There was enough awareness and there was enough.
And that's what I said last week. Yeah.
To start having a discussion like that. So absolutely. But I think a lot of these protesters are full of shit. I think they're the same exact people who, as Fang points out, were saying that we should not expand healthcare services
Well,
to these
yeah,
people.
look,
They just had that knee-jerk reaction. And look, I have had a lifelong, not Tom Cruise level skepticism of institutionalization and psychiatric treatment. But I understand where that movement came from, and I've actually always been pretty sympathetic to the idea of, forced institutionalization as being kind of a horrific nightmare. But we're not in the one flew over the cuckoo's nest lobotomy days. We're not in the days of the forced shock treatment.
Oh, right.
That was part of what stimulated this deinstitutionalization movement. But I don't think they're ever going to set up a row of shock treatment beds again. Yes, should there absolutely be monitoring so that it's not abused, so we don't see Francis Farmer kind of incidents?
It actually has to be rehabilitation. Yeah.
Right. But, and I'm not even arguing against the idea that they should be out in the community with support services, with a lot of support services. But
Right.
you have to put money into that. What was done to Neely, as we got into last week, what's been done to the guy who lives in my building, it's a horror, man. And if the people in this building get burned to death, it's going to be the fault of the city because that person should not be there.
Right. I mean, look, when Tusker called into the show a couple weeks ago, I think it was, she talked about how the rise of fascism always happens when there's a weak left. And I think that those protesters represent a weak social democratic left that is not willing to actually take to the streets and actually stick to it and carry out a knockdown, drag out, long-term fight for the things that will actually stop these incidents from happening. This is very, very simple. In the case of New York City, it's about two things. Number one, housing. All right? There needs to be housing for people. New York's got plenty of housing. Half the apartments in Midtown are vacant right now. They're owned, but they're vacant because the landlords are going to hold out until they can find a sucker to give them $3,500 a month. Why would they make them available to poor and working class people when they think it's more profitable not to? That's one thing. We saw a segment we did with Sabby a couple of weeks back. Kathy Hochul's plans for new housing projects up in smoke because the NIMBY libs didn't want them.
Even in Manhattan.
Again, a weak, quote unquote social democratic left. I would argue that's not even a social democratic left. That's just a corporatized neoliberal co-opted left, right? Sure. But even in the best case, these guys in the subway, right? That's the social democratic left for you. Okay, so housing is one thing. Second thing, obvious one, fundamentals, right? Just bare bones. Healthcare, right? You need universal healthcare, including universal, free at the point of service, mental healthcare.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That's what will actually solve this problem. So if you're on the left, what you need to be doing is actually fighting those battles. What the left is engaged in now is simply symptom management.
It's virtue signaling.
Yeah.
It's virtue signaling. It's much easier to go and use this very charged language around this horrible tragedy. Oh, it's a lynching, it's racism. I don't think this is racially motivated, except insofar as the system is systemically racist. But was this particular incident, can you hone in on this and say this was racially motivated? I don't think so. But it's much easier to go and put yourself on social media making these hysterical statements than it is to actually help someone like this while he's still alive. Okay, you know what? There are a lot of Neelys around the city. Where are the proposals? Where are these people demanding better mental health care for people like Neely?
Mental health care and housing opportunities
and housing
and higher wages. Like, yes, I agree.
Go on the subway tracks and
obviously it shouldn't even get to the point in a sane society, in a just and moral society, in a just and moral city, especially one as up its own ass as New York City, right? You shouldn't even have to be talking about forced institutionalization because there should be infrastructure in place to the point where a guy with mental health issues should be able to live a life on their own in their apartments, with a job,
with a lot of
social assistance and support services. Exactly. Why can't you build that? I mean, the thing that's so obscene about this, the thing that's just so obscene about this story is if you live in or around New York City or visited recently, you see how much money the city has. You see every block on it's got a restaurant where the entrees start at $35 a plate. Like you see all the fucking money and all the decadent lifestyles of all these virtue signaling New York Times reading fucking scumbags who, as Russell said, they'll step over a guy like Jordan Neely every day until he dies. And then they'll block the trains for him.
Yep. Exactly. Look, when we did that Riley Gaines segment, another one was popular with a lot of our fans. One thing we never even got into it because there was so much to cover there. But the really crazy one who released that terrifying trans rights are human rights, that one.
Yeah.
If you notice, you see her at the beginning, and the whole time she's doing a performance for her phone. The whole time.
Right.
You fucking bitch! You fucking bitch! That's what it's all about for these people. It's total fucking narcissistic display.
Exactly.
Right? Like if you really cared, see, okay, here's where I'm gonna do I'm old enough to remember. Okay, so when the 80s homeless wave came, all right, so homeless people for a minute there, the left likes to pick mascots. So the way like trans people are the left's mascots now, the homeless people were the mascots in the 80s. Like that was the left's cause, particularly in New York City, because we had whole streets with people living in refrigerator boxes, like all along Lafayette Avenue by the public. You had people living in refrigerator boxes, and you had all of these efforts. And actually, I was an undercover journalist. I lied about my age to get the job. I was 19, and I would go pretend to be homeless, and I would live with them, and I would go and stay in the shelters with them. At that time, there was a big outpouring of money and volunteerism and effort to try to solve the homelessness problem. That's a long time ago. I mean, there's none of that now. Like, people really don't give a shit now. Like at that time, they really did try to do something about it. Now it's not even discussed really here in New York.
Please clap.